The letter claiming my late husband died $8 million in debt arrived 3 days after his funeral. It had my signature on the back page, a signature I knew I never wrote. My mother-in-law told me to accept it and let him rest in peace. Until I noticed where every single stolen dollar actually went. The first lie came 3 days after we buried Jack. It was sitting in a cream envelope on the marble island in Victoria's kitchen, shoved between a silver tray of cold coffee cups and a towering arrangement of white roses. The whole house smelled like cut stems and expensive soap. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the dining table wrapped in black silk, her hand resting against her throat, diamonds catching the morning light every time she took a breath. Thomas Kimber, the Peterson family's estate lawyer, sat beside her with an open leather binder. He didn't pull out a chair for me. "Deborah," Victoria said, her voice dropping into that soft, breathless register. There is no gentle way to explain this. I'd spent 12 years listening to that voice. It was the tone she used right before saying something cruel enough to draw blood, but wrapped tight enough in false sympathy that you couldn't call her on it without looking unhinged. I pulled out my own chair and sat. Jack had been dead for 11 days. A cerebral aneurysm blew out in his head on a plain Tuesday between breakfast and lunch. He'd kissed me goodbye at 7, forgotten his reading glasses, run back inside to grab them, and kissed me again. By noon, I was standing under flickering fluorescent lights in a hallway while an ER doctor told me there was nothing left to save. Since then, the world had felt unmoored. I kept walking into rooms and forgetting why I was there. Victoria slid the envelope across the polished wood. Inside was a 12-page financial summary stamped with the logo of the Peterson Family Trust. Page 1 showed assets just over $7.8 million. Page 2 listed liabilities at nearly $8.1 million. I read the bottom line. Then I read it again. "This is wrong," I said. Thomas folded his hands over his binder. "I assure you, Deborah, it isn't." Jack talked about the trust all the time. His grandfather set it up decades ago, and Jack had become controlling beneficiary at 35. After we got married, he updated the distribution terms. He told me more than once that if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't have to worry. Not that I'd be rich, just safe. The house would be paid off, and I'd have enough to take time off work without stressing over bills while I figured out how to live without him. According to this paper, the trust had been leveraged to guarantee a mountain of commercial debt, private notes, and real estate loans. "You're telling me Jack died $8 million in the hole?" I asked. Victoria looked down at her rings. "My son carried burdens he didn't want to worry you with." That was her first mistake. Jack couldn't keep a secret to save his life. He told me when he lost $50 playing poker with his buddies. He confessed the minute he scraped my bumper in the garage. He once woke me up at 2 in the morning because he'd accidentally signed up for a $300 software subscription and panicked that I'd see the bank charge before he could cancel it. Jack could keep a birthday gift hidden for maybe 10 minutes. He sure as hell didn't hide an $8 million debt. "What companies?" I asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Excuse me," the summary lists loan guarantees. "What entities took the money?" The schedules list the borrowing entities. They list initials. Those are the registered names. Then give me the formation filings, loan agreements, collateral schedules, transfer authorizations, and the full ledger. Victoria cut her eyes toward Thomas. Just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. Not grief, coordination. Thomas snapped the leather binder shut. "You aren't the trustee, Deborah. I'm the sole beneficiary under Jack's amendment. You were the contingent beneficiary." Circumstances shifted. "What circumstances?" The trust was exhausted. "Then prove it. Show me the accounting." Victoria leaned back, letting out a long, quiet sigh. "This is what I was afraid of." I looked at her. "What were you afraid of?" "That grief would make you hostile," she said smoothly. She reached across the table to pat my arm, but I pulled my hand back before she made contact. "You've always been insecure about money, dear. Jack tried to keep you out of the messy details. I ran our household budget. You paid the power bill." I looked back down at the document. On the final page were 3 signatures: Thomas's, Jack's, and mine, sitting right under a paragraph acknowledging the use of marital and trust assets as loan collateral. From across the room, it looked like my handwriting. Up close, it was all wrong. The D looped too wide at the top. The tail end of Peterson hitched upward instead of trailing off. Whoever traced it knew what my signature looked like, but they didn't know the muscle memory of how my hand actually moved. I didn't sign this. Thomas didn't bother looking at the sheet. You did, I didn't. It's notarized. By who? The notary stamp is attached. It wasn't. Thomas reached out to pull the papers back, but I slammed my palm down on top of them. I'm keeping this. That document is confidential property. It's got my forged name on it. He held my gaze for 3 seconds, then let go. I pushed back my chair. As I turned for the front door, Victoria's voice floated over the marble island. Jack would be sick over how you're acting right now. I looked around her kitchen. The imported quartzite counters, the custom cabinetry, the bronze hardware she once bragged cost more than my first car. Jack hadn't paid for a dime of it, or so I thought. Jack would be sick over a lot of things, I said, and walked out with the envelope clipped under my arm. 2 weeks later, Victoria moved into a $4 million place overlooking Lake Briar. A necessary downsizing, she told her social circle. 7 bedrooms, a wine cellar, an infinity pool, and a circular drive where she parked 3 matching luxury SUVs for herself, her husband, and Jack's younger brother. Public records showed the sale closed 9 days after Jack's heart stopped. I didn't yell. I didn't go to her house. I just started collecting paper. Grief made simple living a mess. I kept forgetting to eat. I left wet clothes in the washer until they smelled like mildew. I woke up at 3 in the morning expecting Jack's shoulder to be pressed against mine. But when I sat down in front of a folder, my brain went completely clear. Numbers don't tell you you're being hysterical. Paper doesn't give a damn about who lives in the bigger house. It just leaves a trail. I sent Thomas a formal written demand for the complete trust accounting. No response. I sent a second one by certified mail. His receptionist signed for it at 10:14 on a Thursday morning. At 3:40 that afternoon, an email hit my inbox accusing me of harassing a grieving family. By 8 o'clock Friday morning, a courier dropped off a cease and desist letter. Thomas warned that if I contacted any banks, lenders, or Peterson business associates, Victoria would sue me for defamation and emotional distress. They thought the letter would scare me into shutting up. Instead, it gave me a roadmap. It told me exactly who they were terrified I'd talk to. So I stopped asking Thomas for permission. Jack kept our important records in a heavy metal file cabinet in our home office. Victoria had tried to get inside it the day after the funeral, claiming it held family documents, but I'd locked the door on her. I dug through every folder in the bottom drawer. Tucked behind old tax returns and appliance manuals, I found a thin blue folder marked Trust Amendment. Inside was a certified copy of the paper Jack signed 4 years ago. It named me sole successor beneficiary. Better yet, it had an asset protection clause. Any debt secured against trust property required 3 things: written beneficiary consent, independent trustee sign-off, and a collateral schedule filed with the county clerk before any money moved. The document Victoria handed me claimed all 3 had been done. The county clerk's office opened at 8:30 the next morning. I was sitting in the parking lot at 8:15. The record's basement smelled like damp limestone and old dust. A clerk named Ruth helped me pull the public filings under the trust's name. There was no collateral schedule, no trustee approval, no amended beneficiary form. What was there was a financing statement Jack had filed 18 months prior, officially confirming the trust was fully funded and completely free of liens. I need certified copies of everything, I told her. Ruth pulled the heavy iron metal press down on each sheet. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. I took the stack straight to the main bank downtown, where Jack kept our accounts. The branch manager, Samuel Price, took me into his glass office. He started off stiff and professional, using that soft bank teller voice reserved for recent widows. Then he looked at the certified trust amendment. His face changed. He left the office and came back with a regional compliance officer on a laptop screen. For 20 minutes, they grilled me. Confirmed my identity, my marriage, Jack's date of death, whether I'd ever signed away power of attorney. Then Samuel turned his monitor toward me. 6 months before Jack died, virtually the entire cash balance of the trust was wired to an account belonging to something called Breyer Holdings Group. The transfer was authorized using an active power of attorney. Mine, I stared at the screen. My signature was right there on the digitized form, complete with a notary stamp. It was a much better fake than the one Thomas showed me, but it still wasn't mine. "I never signed this," I said. Samuel went pale. "Mrs. Peterson, our file indicates you were present in the branch." "I wasn't. We have a copy of your driver's license on file for the transaction." The license on the screen was mine, all right. Same photo, same old address. But it was a card I'd lost 2 years ago during a Christmas party at Victoria's house. I thought I'd dropped it in the street. 3 days later, Victoria called to say her maid found my wallet under a couch in the guest room. I turned to Samuel. "Who notarized this?" He zoomed in on the seal. The notary was an administrative assistant at Thomas Kimber's law firm. The compliance officer on the screen chimed in, telling me the bank was launching an internal fraud investigation and strongly advising me to get a lawyer and call the police. I did both. But I realized real quick that proving a crime and getting money back are two entirely different problems. The bank could flag the account, but they couldn't just yank back cash that had already been funneled through 4 different shell companies to buy real estate. The police were slow. Probate court would take years. Meanwhile, Victoria was spending money like she was trying to burn it before sunrise. That's when I hired Kathy Sloan. Kathy was a forensic accountant with short gray hair, scuffed orthopedics, and a habit of staring at you in complete silence before she spoke. Her office didn't have mahogany desks or framed diplomas, just 2 massive monitors, filing cabinets, and a whiteboard covered in flowcharts. I dumped the trust records, bank statements, forged power of attorney, and Thomas's threat letter on her desk. She read for 45 minutes without taking a sip of her water. Then she looked up. "Do you want to figure out how they took it, or do you want to find where it is right now?" "I know how they took it," I said. "I want to know where it is." "Good," she grunted. "Saves us a week." Kathy followed the money. The trust funds hit Breyer Holdings and split in 10 directions within 48 hours. Down payments on the lake house, lease deposits on the subs, accounts at high-end jewelers. The rest was shuffled through 3 holding entities with names off a fake corporate generator: Ashwood Cultural Foundation, Peterson Strategic Development, Northcrest Management. Victoria had tried to build a maze, but she was too greedy to be smart. She wanted everything right away: the estate, the cars, the status. The stolen trust money wasn't even enough to buy it all outright, so she used it as leverage to borrow more. Millions more. Kathy tracked the debt to a hard money private lender called Halcyon Capital Partners. Halcyon held first position liens on almost everything. The mansion belonged to Breyer Holdings, which had pledged the property and all its corporate stock. The vehicles were tied up in commercial notes. Even the furniture in the house had collateral claims tagged to it. Victoria didn't own a luxurious life. She was living in a house of cards built out of subprime commercial loans, and the payments were already falling behind. Kathy flipped one of her monitors toward me. A sheet of red numbers lined the screen. "Breyer Holdings is 2 months late on the mortgage," she said. "The car entity missed 3 payments. Halcyon issued default notices 30 days ago. Why haven't they seized the assets? They don't want the headache. It's a messy portfolio, tangled ownership, bad paperwork, high-value assets spread around town. Halcyon's looking to offload the paper to cut their losses. To who? Anybody with cash who's willing to buy the whole package." I looked at the payoff total at the bottom of the screen. It was a massive number, but distressed debt doesn't sell for full price. Halcyon didn't want the hassle, they wanted out. "How much will they take to dump it?" I asked. Kathy named a figure. My chest went tight. Even at a massive discount, buying that debt would take every dime I had left in the world. Our personal savings, my retirement accounts, penalties be damned. The proceeds from selling the tiny rental duplex my dad had willed to me. Everything Jack and I had built on our own, completely separate from his mother. "If I buy this," I said, "what do I actually hold?" "The mortgage, the liens, the stock pledges. The right to enforce them immediately. Can she fight me in court? She'll try. Could I lose it all? Yes, Kathy said bluntly. If a judge decides to stall, you're holding millions in bad paper. I don't sugarcoat things, Deborah. I stared at the red numbers on the screen. For weeks, I'd been trying to get back what was stolen, but the cash was gone. It had been converted into stone walls, leather seats, oil paintings, and bad debt. I could spend 5 years in court chasing ghosts, or I could step in front of the train. Call Halcyon, I said. Kathy looked at me over her glasses. Are you sure? No, I said. Call them anyway. 2 days later, Victoria dragged me into court requesting an emergency restraining order. Her legal filing called me mentally unstable, obsessed, and dangerous. She claimed I was stalking her, harassing her business partners, and trying to destroy the Peterson family name out of spite. Thomas attached a sworn statement saying I'd lost my mind after Jack died. They even included grainy parking lot photos of me walking into the county clerk's office and Kathy's building. At the hearing, Victoria sat across the aisle wearing a simple navy dress and a delicate gold cross around her neck. She looked small, frail. It was her best trick, turning pure malice into soft, maternal suffering. Her lawyer spent 20 minutes telling the judge how I was weaponizing my grief to terrorize a mourning mother. Then my lawyer stood up. He handed the judge the cease and desist letter, the certified county filings, the forged power of attorney, and a formal letter from the bank confirming an active criminal fraud investigation targeting Thomas's firm. The judge denied her restraining order on the spot. Outside on the courthouse steps, local news cameras were waiting. Victoria paused at the top of the stairs, adjusting her scarf and putting on a brave face for the reporters. I put my head down and kept walking. That night on the 11 o'clock news, a clip aired of Victoria saying the family was praying for everyone affected by this tragic time. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The next morning, Halcyon accepted my offer. The 11 days that followed were a blur of paperwork, wire transfers, wire fees, and panic attacks. I sold my dad's duplex to an investor for quick cash. I emptied my 401k. I signed paper after paper warning me about financial risk until my fingers were cramped. Right before I signed the final transfer agreement, I stopped with the pen resting on the line. I remembered something Jack said years ago. Victoria had insulted my family over dinner, then thrown a fit and accused me of making a scene when I quietly got up to leave the restaurant. Later that night, Jack sat on the edge of our bed and put his head in his hands. She doesn't know what to do when she can't control the room, he'd told me. I thought he meant she was just bossy. Now I finally got it. Victoria didn't need to actually own anything. She just needed everyone to believe she did. I signed my name on the line. Halcyon assigned the entire master debt portfolio to an LLC Kathy helped me set up, Peterson Recovery Holdings. Plain, boring, nobody looking at the filing would see me coming. Which was crucial, because Victoria was busy throwing herself a massive charity gala at the lake house. It was a fundraiser for a youth arts foundation tied to her husband's state senate campaign. Local TV was covering it. 300 prominent people were coming. The invitations called the place the Peterson Estate. Meanwhile, working through Peterson Recovery Holdings, we issued formal notices of default. We sent them to the registered agent for Victoria's entities, to Thomas's office. Thomas fired back a demand for proof of assignment. We sent it. He demanded payment histories. We sent them. He claimed the loans weren't in default. We sent back copies of the missed payments, acceleration clauses, and signed default notices. Then he went completely quiet. That quiet worried Kathy more than his legal threats. They know someone bought the debt, she told me. They just don't realize it's you yet. Can they hide the stuff? I asked. The house and the cars aren't going anywhere, she said. But smaller things can disappear. Then we don't wait. The vehicle notes allowed for immediate repossession upon default. The commercial equipment required court-ordered seizure, and the pledged stock in Breyer Holdings allowed us to take control of the company once the cure period expired. That last part was the hammer. Breyer Holdings owned the lake house. Victoria didn't. She was living there under a temporary residential license issued by her own company. Once I owned Breyer Holdings, I owned the house. I could revoke her license and start legal eviction. I couldn't throw her out on her ear in 5 minutes. The law doesn't work like a movie, but I could show up with the paper that proved she was a squatter in my house. We scheduled the repossession enforcement for the night of the gala. Kathy asked if I wanted to pull back, maybe do it quietly on a Monday morning. No, I said. She likes an audience. The night of the event, the lake house looked like a palace lit up for a coronation. Valets were moving luxury sedans around the circular drive. Women in floor-length gowns walked under white heated tents while news cameras flashed near the front doors. I arrived at 8:20 in a dark green dress Jack bought me for an anniversary dinner 3 years ago. No jewelry except my wedding band. A hired security guard blocked me at the bottom of the front steps. Before he could say a word, Victoria stepped out through the grand double doors. She was wearing silver. Of course she was. The quiet around us spread like a stain. Guests slowed down, drinks held halfway to their lips. Victoria took 2 steps down the stone staircase. "Deborah," she said, her voice easily carrying to the people nearby, "this is a private function. I know, you aren't welcome here. I know that too." Thomas was standing a few feet behind her holding a glass of white wine. The second his eyes hit me, his expression broke. Just a crack, but I saw it. He knew. Victoria glanced toward a TV camera crew, then forced a sad, patronizing smile. "I know you're struggling, dear. But making a scene here isn't going to get you any of Jack's money." She had it all staged perfectly in her head. The tragic, dignified mother. The crazy, greedy widow. The multi-million-dollar mansion backing her up as proof of who mattered and who didn't. "I'm not here about Jack's estate," I said. "Then what could you possibly want?" Headlights swung around the bend at the bottom of the driveway. Not one set. 6. A marked sheriff's cruiser led the line. Behind it were 2 massive flatbed tow trucks and 3 unmarked moving vans. The chatter on the lawn died instantly. Victoria's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out of the cruiser, followed by a court-appointed enforcement agent holding a heavy manila folder. The tow trucks rumbled right up the gravel, backing toward the row of luxury SUVs parked around the fountain. Thomas set his wine glass on a stone balustrade and came down the steps fast. "What is the meaning of this?" The enforcement agent ignored him, looking up at the porch. "Victoria Banks-Peterson? Speak to our attorney," she snapped, gesturing at Thomas. The agent handed Thomas a fat packet of papers. Judicial seizure orders for personal property listed in Schedules A through H. We also have repossession orders for the vehicles on site. Guests began backing away from the cars. A cameraman swung his rig around, framing the tow trucks against the lit-up mansion. Thomas was flipping through the pages so fast he almost tore them. His face drained of color until he looked like a corpse. "This is impossible." "No," I said. "It was just expensive." Victoria rounded on me. "What did you do?" I didn't answer her. Behind us, tow truck drivers were already slapping magnetic lights onto the back of her black SUV. A deputy walked past us into the grand foyer, carrying a clipboard and a roll of small, brightly colored inventory tags. Through the massive front windows, I watched guests clear out of the main room while deputies began sticking yellow tags onto oil paintings, bronze statues, and custom leather sofas. It wasn't rowdy. Nobody was shouting or throwing things. It was completely calm, methodical. Every item had a number, and every number belonged to a default schedule. Victoria rushed down the steps. "You can't do this. This is my home." The enforcement agent looked over his glasses. "Ma'am, the secured lender is executing its rights following an uncured default on the master note." "I am the lender," I said. For the first time in the 12 years I'd known her, Victoria had no face left to put on. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Thomas turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "You bought the Halcyon portfolio, every last cent of it. With what money? My money. This is pure malice, Deborah." "Malice would have been buying it just to hurt you," I said clearly, letting my voice carry to the crowd behind them. "I bought it because almost every asset securing those loans was bought with money stolen from my dead husband's trust. A few people in the crowd gasped. Some turned away, pretending not to listen, but nobody left. A hydraulic lift whined as the first SUV was hauled onto the back of a flatbed. Victoria stepped right into my space. Up close, the polished matriarch was totally gone. Behind her eyes was the woman who had spent a decade making fun of my clothes, ignoring my career, and whispering to Jack that I was beneath him. "You think taking my furniture makes you part of this family?" she hissed. "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "Losing Jack freed me from ever having to care about this family again." The enforcement officer asked us to move off the steps. Two movers came out the front door carrying a massive framed canvas between them. Victoria's husband was standing in the foyer looking lost, while Jack's brother was screaming at a tow truck driver who was currently hooking chains to his coupe. A local news reporter was already doing a live hit near the fountain, speaking low into her mic. Victoria watched her entire life get broadcast in high definition. Then she looked back up at the house, her chin coming up just an inch. She still thought she had the main prize. The cars were gone, the art was gone, but the brick and mortar, the grand symbol, was still hers. I reached into my handbag and pulled out one last envelope. Cream-colored. I'd picked it out on purpose. "This is for you." She wouldn't touch it. Thomas took it, his hands shaking as he pulled out the notice. "What is that?" she demanded. Thomas couldn't even speak. "Briar Holdings pledged its stock as collateral for the Halcyon loans," I told her. "The default period ended yesterday." "The stock transfer cleared at 4 o'clock today." She stared at me. "Briar Holdings owns this house," I said. "As the new owner of Briar Holdings, I just fired the property manager and revoked your residential license. You can't evict me." "Not tonight," I said softly. A flash of relief washed over her face. "Formal eviction papers hit the court on Monday," I added. "You'll get the notice required by law. You can stay until the judge sets the date, but you aren't allowed to move, sell, or touch a single piece of corporate property inside that house. The inventory team is going to stay inside tonight to make sure of it." Victoria began to shake. She clasped her hands together in front of her silver dress to hide it, but I could see her knuckles going white. "You would put a grieving mother out on the street?" Something cold and entirely clear settled in my chest. "You used your dead son's name to steal from his wife." "That's a lie. You used my stolen driver's license at the bank." "I didn't have anything to do with that." "Then I'm sure you'll be happy to clear that up with the police." At the words police, 3 people near the top of the steps quietly turned around and walked back toward their cars. Thomas grabbed Victoria's arm. "We need to go inside, right now." She ignored him, staring at me with pure venom. "You've humiliated us." "No," I said. "I just took away the loan." I turned around and walked down the driveway. Behind me, the flatbeds were revving their engines. Inside the house, the string quartet had stopped playing, their violins resting uselessly in their laps. Victoria had spent her whole life convincing people that looking rich was the same thing as being rich. That if you spoke softly enough and wore expensive enough clothes, you could rewrite any dirty thing you did. But under every room she decorated and every car she drove, there was a paper trail. A loan, a signature, a lie, and every single one of them belonged to me now. "Jack would hate you for this," she screamed after me. For one quick second, the grief hit me like a physical punch. I saw Jack standing at our kitchen counter burning toast and laughing about it. I saw his reading glasses lying next to the sink. I felt the awful, freezing cold of that hospital hallway. Then I remembered the blue folder tucked in the bottom drawer of our file cabinet, the amendment he'd signed 4 years ago. The quiet, boring piece of paper he'd put in place just to make sure I'd be safe if he wasn't there. I turned back one last time. "No," I said. "Jack would hate that you made me do it." The criminal stuff dragged out over the next year. The notary from Thomas's firm panicked and cut a deal with the prosecutor, admitting she stamped the power of attorney without me there because Thomas told her it was just an internal family matter. Bank surveillance footage pulled from the archives showed Victoria walking into a branch 6 months before Jack died, wearing big sunglasses and carrying my lost driver's license in a plastic sleeve. Thomas tried to claim he was completely in the dark, but state investigators found law firm ledgers showing he'd taken a six-figure consulting fee straight out of the Breyer Holdings account the week the trust was drained. The second real prison time entered the picture. Victoria and Thomas turned on each other like stray dogs over a bone. That was the real ending, not the tow trucks or the TV cameras. The second they had to tell the truth to save themselves, the whole fake empire collapsed into nothing. I never lived in the lake house. I sold it 9 months later to a young family with 3 kids. The sale paid off the hard money loans, got me back everything I'd spent buying the debt, and covered my legal bills. Victoria ended up pleading out to reduced fraud charges to avoid prison, taking probation and a massive restitution order that stripped her of pretty much everything she had left. A year after the gala, a stranger emailed me a link to a video online. It was the news footage of the tow trucks pulling up her driveway while the string quartet played in the background. People in the comments were cheering, calling it ultimate revenge. They missed the point. I didn't win on her driveway. I won in a damp basement at the county clerk's office when a heavy iron seal pressed into a piece of paper. I won when I stopped waiting for a liar to treat me fairly. On the anniversary of Jack's death, I went out to the cemetery alone. I didn't bring flowers. Jack always said cut flowers were depressing because you were just watching something die in slow motion. Instead, I brought a copy of a press release announcing a new scholarship foundation in his name for students studying forensic accounting and financial law. I sat down in the grass next to his stone. I stayed there for an hour, telling him the whole story. The bank, the notary, the fake signature, the tow trucks, the house. The wind blew through the oak trees overhead. I reached out and put my hand over his name carved into the granite. Victoria thought she could erase me with a stolen signature. Thomas thought the law was just something you manipulated if you were smart enough. They were both wrong. A fake signature can move money around for a little while. It can buy a house and park cars in a driveway. But every lie leaves a line on a ledger somewhere. Every transfer leaves a footprint. And eventually, somebody shows up to read the fine print.